Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Dynasty Tradecast, brought to you by RotoViz Radio and MyFFPC. Alrighty, I know we've had some time with Dan and I, just us two rolling for a little bit, but we're a little bit changing up some things today. Did an audible hut hut. We Dan is out as far as we know. He could end up sneaking in at some point, but he's likely out. And in this place is going to be our fantastic editor slash occasional guest co-host, Justin Peak. How's it going tonight, Justin?
Going great. SFB day, so been pretty excited today. Just got back from a long trip too, so been recovering from that and just trying to we got already 3 rounds into that draft. It's been fun.
There you go. I mean, I'm sure there's people that are listening to this as it's being published and saying that they're still only at pick 15 and they want to strangle you. Nothing more popular in SFB than people getting angry about being, not far along enough. People bragging, "Oh, my draft is in the 7th round after the first day," in your face. And so SFB, obviously, if you don't know about SFB, I'm not sure what you're doing, but it's the now 1,200 team tournament. 112 team leagues in it, and it's basically a tournament hosted by the one and only Scott Fish, and Justin got his first ever entry. So we have to assume that that's because of the Dynasty Tradecast, right?
I can't think of any other reason why it would have happened. It came on the 4th of July too. I was all but resigned that I wasn't getting a spot. And it was just one of the fan spots, so it wasn't an analyst thing. But I gotta think it still had something to do with having jumped in to help out y'all, that he decided to give me a shot.
There we go. All right. Before we get into the show, I want to let you guys know that hold on. You're gonna have to edit this out. Where's the RotoViz read for? Oh, there it is. Okay. Alrighty, before we get into the show, I'm going to give you guys the good old RotoViz read. RotoViz, the Patreon is back for a second season. It's better than ever, and patronships start at just $6 per month. We now offer exclusive access to RotoViz Radio, Slack, where you can ask questions and gain league-winning advice from many of the podcast and writing team. Patrons also get first dibs on listener league spots, league starting soon. And in the $9 tier, you get some sweet RotoViz Radio merch too at the end of the season. Become a RotoViz Radio patron today. Join an exclusive community of listeners, access premium content, do your part in helping the network grow, and continue to help produce high-quality, industry-leading programming. Patreon.com/RotoViz Radio. And don't forget, speaking of exclusives, as a little podcast listener, you get 10% off RotoViz NFL Pass right now. It's available through the NFL Podcast homepage, rotoviz.com/podcast. Get ready for that. Get ready for the beginning of the season. It's coming up before you know it. Training camp's about to happen. Gain limited access to all of our NFL content and tools, so you get amazing value and support the podcast network. Once again, it's rotoviz.com/podcast. So rotoviz.com/podcast, patreon.com/rotoviz radio. Get to supporting these shows. All right, so last week we covered how will they bust. We covered the scenarios in which certain players will become busts based on their dynasty ADP. Obviously, that's a little bit negative. So we're being a little more positive this week. We're going to be more happy, some cheery. We're talking about how will they break out. We're going to talk about how certain players will be exceeding their ADP and the scenarios that will happen for that to happen. And, of course, the players that will benefit or be hurt by those breakouts as well. So, first one, how will they break out? Wide receiver Curtis Samuel has a 92 ADP right now. How will Curtis Samuel break out, Justin?
I think the biggest thing, this is the first offseason he's had where he's actually been healthy, at least knock on wood so far. So I think that's going to be a big boost for him to be able to go into this year and be able to have gotten kind of that chemistry and everything. Obviously, a lot of that is going to depend on Cam's healthiness as well. But with the loss of Devin Funchess and him being able to come in and again with a healthy offseason and be able to soak up those targets and everything, what targets he had, and then just with obviously he's got a completely different game than Funchess has and everything, but should be able to light it up. You have any other thoughts on?
Yeah, I think that the one of the keys to a Curtis Samuel breakout is a reduction in the role from Christian McCaffrey. Certainly, that is, he's being drafted as a top 3 pick in redraft, so it's not anticipated that he's going to lose some work. But I will say that if they do scale his work back at all, it is, it will be a great benefit to Curtis Samuel because, he's going to get some more of that work out of the backfield, possibly, some end around, some, receiving out of the backfield, as well as just traditional wide receiver work as well. So Curtis Samuel is one of those, he's a gadget player, but he has ways to have success outside of just the gadget. So you get the, the bonus of what a Patterson would bring if in his optimal scenario, but also he is just a good wide receiver as well. So I think that you have to have some reduction in a role for Christian McCaffrey for him to have full breakout, but also I think that you just have to have the Panthers become more of a, not necessarily pass happy. They don't have to be like in the top 10 of passing in the league, but they just have to not be, the run heaviest team in the league.
Right. Yeah, it definitely too. All the seems like a lot of the NFL teams, especially with the Gurley, into the season last year, want to go a little bit more with not loading up their running back. So we definitely could see that out of Christian McCaffrey as well, and that would definitely help be able to spread things out a little bit more. He definitely had a huge part of that offense last year.
Now, those that are fans of Curtis Samuel, I have seen some say that would then hurt the potential breakout of a DJ Moore, a guy who has a higher ADP, probably in the 40s or 50s right now. Some say, oh, don't draft DJ Moore because Curtis Samuel will break out. Do you think a Curtis Samuel breakout, prevents a DJ Moore breakout, or could they both have breakout type fantasy seasons?
I mean, I definitely don't think so. If there are any issues with Cam's health, then I mean, I don't know that really either of them could live up to their ADP. But assuming that Cam is healthy, I definitely think he can support both of those. It is going to be an efficient offense with, if Cam is healthy, with McCaffrey and everything he can do, and having Curtis Samuel and DJ Moore, there's going to be a lot of places that defenses are going to have to cover, and they're going to be able to be efficient. I don't see any reason why Cam can't support both of them. And there's not really any competition for Curtis to not be the wide receiver 2 there. And you've got oh crap, I'm drawing a blank on tight end now.
Olsen, not Thomas.
Olsen, yeah, but you've got Olsen and Ian Thomas that can soak up some targets too. But with Olsen's age and everything, it's he's definitely a risk that he may not stay on the field and everything. And then Ian Thomas, I don't think he's necessarily a threat. Obviously, both those are going to have a completely different game to Curtis Samuel and to DJ Moore as well. So I think that offense definitely can have them both. Like I said, the only real concern is with Cam being on the field. But
all righty, let's move on to our next player, and it's going to be a fan favorite of myself, and that is Sam Darnold, quarterback, New York Jets, currently being drafted at 122 overall. So around that 10th round range of 12-team startups. This is a guy that I was drafting heavily when he was being drafted in mid-late second round of rookie drafts, and I still think is a good value now. Obviously value is a little bit decreased after not the best rookie season, but not bad enough that you should be, running away with maybe like your Josh Allen's, passing numbers were. So Sam Darnold, they didn't really invest in the draft or in free agency like we possibly thought they would. They're kind of just entering with Robbie Anderson and Quincy Enunwa. I guess the one big investment in weapons would be Le'Veon Bell. So is Le'Veon Bell a key role in the Sam Darnold breakout?
Oh, I definitely think, Bell's going to have to be able to mesh with that offense and come in swinging with a full year off and go into a new offense. That definitely is something that would be a concern with Bell. But if he does come in and meshes well, I don't see how that can't improve Darnold's stock and everything, and his ability to be able to make plays just with everything getting spread out a little bit more. Bell's obviously a much better talent than anything they had last year anywhere on the field. So just with him getting on, like I said, if he's able to step right in and basically be the Le'Veon Bell that he was with Steelers 2 years ago, if he can step right in and have that kind of talent level again, then that's going to help everybody on that offense, and especially Darnold that everything runs through. So and then with Bell being a kind of a dual role at pass catching back, that all is still going to feed through Darnold too. So yeah, that I think that his breakout this year will definitely hinge on Bell and kind of how he melds with that offense.
Yeah, I think that we might be a year early on projecting a breakout for Darnold because we need what we were expecting entering the season. We need that wide receiver one alpha, whether it's in free agency or whether it's in the draft. Maybe they go out and try and acquire Michael Thomas if he doesn't get a long-term deal in New Orleans. But in all likelihood, it'll end up being the draft, which everyone is anticipating the 2020 wide receiver class being amazing. So along with the running backs. But anyways, with Darnold, obviously Anderson runs a bit hot and cold, Robbie Anderson. But I think he's good enough to be a wide receiver one on a team that has like a QB2, a guy who's in like that QB like 15 to QB 20 range. And that's kind of what you have to expect from Darnold. And I think anything higher than that would be a quote unquote breakout.
Right.
All right, let's move on to a pair of players, a pair of Pittsburgh Steelers wide receivers. Deontay Johnson out of Toledo going 176 overall in startups, and James Washington going 93 overall in startups. Is there a favorite between these two in terms of value and how you project a possible breakout?
I would obviously think that James Washington is more likely to get that role, but especially with just how much higher his ADP is, I think Deontay Johnson does have a chance to be able to step in there, and if he does get any significant work, then he's definitely going to shoot up. I don't necessarily know that he would be. It's going to be a far stretch to say that he's more than even a flex play this year. But if he's soaking up really any targets and competing with Washington or Moncrief and getting work in that offense, then that ADP is going to shoot up significantly from 176.
Yes, so you did mention it. The key factor in avoiding these two from breaking out would be Dante Moncrief, taking up those wide receiver 2 targets. And certainly Ben Roethlisberger has shown that the wide receiver 3 can be relevant there. But I don't like the wide receiver 3 has been relevant there when like the top 2 wide receivers have been Antonio Brown and Emmanuel Sanders, or Antonio Brown and Juju Smith-Schuster. So, I don't think they quite have that level of talent at the wide receiver position right now. I do think that the wide receiver 2 there, whether it be Johnson or Washington, certainly I favored Washington as a prospect. I favor Washington now. But I don't think that the separation in possible breakout potential between Washington and Johnson is indicative of their ADP price. I do think that, Washington should be a guy that you're targeting in like the mid to late second round of rookie drafts, or a guy that you're trying to send a future second for. Because, future first have some volatility because they, an early first is so much more valuable than a late first, and it changes value over the course of the year. Even if like you trade for a future second and it becomes an early second, it's not like you hit the jackpot. It's like, oh, I got the better range of outcomes, but it's not like you stole a future pick like you would if you were trading for a pick that ended up being an early first.
Yeah, I definitely, there's a lot, just like you said, there's a lot different value between the beginning of the first and early first versus beginning of the first and end of the first versus the beginning of the second, end of the second. So sending a second to get get somebody like that is definitely going to be a fair value for what he's going for right now. And like I said, doesn't open you up to that risk of if the rest of your team doesn't perform. I had that happen in one of your leagues last year where I thought I didn't think I would win necessarily, but thought it'd be a playoff team, and all of a sudden my pick was the 101, and I had traded it, and it definitely stings. So that's a very real risk. But the second, it's not. I wasn't even thinking and going back and looking at what I traded my second for in that. So you're definitely right with that.
Mm-hmm. What impact do you think Vance McDonald has, or even the running backs in Pittsburgh have on the potential breakout of that wide receiver too?
I mean, they definitely. Vance McDonald, I think, is going to have a solid year with having Jesse James leaving and him being able to be the sole tight end. Obviously, we've seen Ben, throw to his tight ends plenty and make them, relevant. So, I think he's definitely going to be some competition there, and I am kind of leaning towards that. Connor isn't going to have necessarily that. He kind of stepped right into that Bell role that did everything, and I think they saw that that's not necessarily the best play. And Samuels was more than fine, and Snell being able to get some of that red zone work. I think they're going to be spreading that out more. So I don't know that necessarily the running backs are going to soak up as much of those targets with them, kind of both. I don't know that they're on the field at the same time to soak up that, but definitely I think Vance McDonald has some of that risk to be able to take those. I mean, and there's a real risk of that offense just not being as effective as what it's been in the past, with so many pieces leaving and, Ben not being able to support as many wide receivers as he has in the past.
Yeah, he's certainly getting older, and they might try and lean on Connor in the run game more so than they have in the past. Or even we talked about Benny Snell, maybe it was last week, possibly taking some carries. So maybe they try and transition to a more run heavy offense, like we've kind of seen with Tom Brady with the Patriots. They've run it a bunch with Sony Michel, and now they're going to do it with Damian Harris. So let's move on to our next player. It's going to be J.J. Arcega-Whiteside of the Philadelphia Eagles, currently going off the board at 105 overall. I will say Arcega-Whiteside's an interesting player because I feel like most of Twitter analysts and fantasy writers value him higher than where they're actually taking him. Like most of the time when I see J.J. Arcega-Whiteside tweets in relation to, I traded this for him, or I drafted him at this position, everyone is always just assuming they got a steal. And I'm one of those guys. I took Arcega-Whiteside many times in that like 201 to 204 range, and I think that's a great value for him, especially for those that are saying like, I'd rather have a future second over the 201, which is just silly, especially if you can get Arcega-Whiteside. So have you seen kind of a similar thing with Arcega-Whiteside? Like basically when people get them, they think they're getting a steal.
Oh yeah. I mean, it definitely, I think you're right that he is worth, at least a late first. And so everybody that's getting him in the early second is getting some value there. But I mean, you're right that it is so common. I've seen it so much more often where he is going in the early second. So it almost seems, that's what his value is, but it's not what his value is. Kind of like what you're saying that, everybody is basically taking him in the second. There's so many people, obviously, that because others are getting him in the early second, people are passing on it in the first. A lot of people. So, I don't necessarily know that that's what his true value is because I've seen him go, in the second so often. But I definitely think he should be, in that late first. He's definitely talented. I know a lot of analysts like to make sure that they're in the podcast. I don't know. Assume you've heard his the pronunciation. I won't even try to say his name anymore because I don't want to try. But I just say J-Jaw, the Arcega.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not even going to try that JJ Arcega-Whiteside. But I will say, well, let's go back to the general question at hand, and it is how will they break out? This has always been the case with Alshon Jeffrey, basically since like his breakout season with Chicago. They've been trying to put him in the grave ever since then, and they're doing it once again. And I think that the breakout of Arcega-Whiteside and the health or lack thereof of Alshon Jeffrey don't necessarily need to be directly correlated. Yes, you do have a high volume tight end in Zach Ertz, and you have a legitimate tight end too in Dallas Goedert. But I think that it's more to do with a Nelson Aguilar fade out, and that they could just end up saying, all right, Aguilar, like, you're a good role player, a guy who can be a wide receiver 3 for us. But at the end of the day, Arcega-Whiteside is our wide receiver 2 who we're developing into a wide receiver 1.
Yeah, I definitely think that, it is going to have less to do with Alshon Jeffrey. I mean, I think it will eventually fade out too, like you said, where JJ will eventually be the wide receiver 1, but he's got that talent to be that. And, I don't know that, like, we've seen Aguilar do some good things, but I don't think he would be able to carry that role. And, that's exactly where I think he's going to end up. If JJ breaks out, it's at the expense of Aguilar this year. Like I said, not as much, I would think, at the expense of Jeffrey. But if Aguilar fades out and everything, then that definitely is going to open up that role for him to step in right away. And, I would think that he at least has the talent and ability to become that one down the road. I don't think he's obviously not going to be that this year, but
yeah. I mean, with Arcega-Whiteside, I do think that people are not accounting for his possible ceiling. I think people are mostly considering this a redshirt year behind Alshon and behind Aguilar, which is certainly a possibility. But he was drafted in the second round. He's had 16 yards per catch every year of his college career, had 14 touchdowns last year, 1,059 yards in a pretty run-heavy offense, if I'm remembering correctly, at Stanford. So I think that he's being valued somewhat correctly in terms of a draft prospect. But I do think people are kind of either, one, completely dismissing Jeffrey, or two, completely dismissing Arcega-Whiteside. And I don't think either of those should be the case in the short term. All righty, let's move on to letting you guys know that, hi, RotoViz fans. I'm going to give you a brief second, and then I'm going to tell you our good friends at the FFPC, the home of season-long high-stakes fantasy football. It's been 10 years since the FFPC filled their first Dynasty League, and they've now grown to the world's largest Dynasty League commissioner, with leagues as high as $5,000 to enter. FFPC leagues are active and competitive, and not a single league has ever folded. Brand new Dynasty Startup Leagues are forming right now, not yesterday, not tomorrow, right now, starting at $77 and up in standard, superflex, and best ball formats. And for those of you ready for your greatest challenge yet, take a look at this year's FFPC main event. What is the main event exactly? It's the world's biggest event in season-long fantasy football. And this year it's coming at you with a $500,000 grand prize and over $3.1 million in total prizes. Come to Las Vegas for a 3-day weekend of live drafts and festivities at the Planet Hollywood Resort and Casino, or draft online from the comfort of your home. Find out more about the main event deadline coming up in just a few days on Monday, July 22nd. Go to myffpc.com and register now. That's myffpc.com, the home of season-long high-stakes fantasy football. Alrighty, so now that everyone has paused their podcast service and has gotten their FFPC main event team, and then they've said if they win, they will give at least 6% to the Dynasty Tradecast team. Let's move on to our next one. I feel like this is an interesting one because I don't think many people are projecting this as a possible breakout, but it's Royce Freeman. Royce Freeman, 97 overall. And I guess I'll start with the obvious of how this breakout would happen. And it would be Philip Lindsay is Thomas Rawls. He's a 1-year undrafted free agent, guy who flames out due to injury or just not being good enough long-term. And Royce Freeman was a day 2 pick, a guy who, is going to be, inserted into the lineup and guy who's going to get the carries. How do you see a possible Royce Freeman breakout?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it has to come at the expense of Philip Lindsay there. He would need to step up into that role that he was drafted to last year. I definitely think with the draft capital that he has, that he's likely going to get that shot again and be able to still have that chance to be able to step up and fill that role. But he's going to. I mean, Lindsey looked really good last year, and I don't know that it's going to happen without an injury or something to Lindsey for Freeman unless he just really shows out.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that it doesn't necessarily have to be an injury because Denver is going to insert him in the lineup to try and prove their draft pick correct. That's always the case when you're looking at guys who have two very different draft capitals. Now, I'm not necessarily saying go out and buy Freeman because, obviously, from what we saw in year one, Philip Lindsay's a better running back. And the prices are indicative of that. I'm pretty sure that Lindsay's probably going like the 60 to 70 range, 20 or 25 picks ahead of Freeman. But I do think that his ADP of 97 is kind of assuming that Lindsay's the RB1. And I don't think that that's something you can assume quite yet. Sure, if you see more of what we saw the rookie year from Lindsay, then you can assume that the RB2 is Freeman. But I don't think we can assume that quite yet.
Yeah, Lindsay actually was 64 for June, so definitely quite a bit higher than Freeman, and deservedly so after what he showed last year. Like I said, I do think, like you said, just with the draft capital difference, they're definitely going to give Freeman a chance to be able to surpass him, but he's definitely going to have to show that he deserves it and better than he did last year.
All right, so I'll get your take on this. You have the quarterback battle, if there even is one. Is it just Joe Flacco's to lose, and then possibly Drew Lock comes in later in the season or comes in possibly next year? Is there a quarterback between the two that would help the potential of a Royce Freeman breakout, or do you think it's more just about his battle with Lindsey?
I would think that it's more his battle with Lindsey. I don't know that, especially this year. I'm not expecting that battle. I've never been a Joe Flacco fan, but I can't imagine them acquiring him and then sitting him this year already. I think they had enough with looking at trying to find the quarterbacks and going ahead and sticking them in early, and not getting anything out of it. So I think they're ready this year for that to just be completely Joe Flacco. So I don't know that there's really a whole lot of chance for Locke to come in. And I don't think Flacco is going to be so unsuccessful that they need to go to Locke. Obviously, they're, if there's an injury, then that's what they'll end up doing. But, I just don't see really Flacco being bad enough that they decide they need to go ahead and go to him, and then that would change anything for either running back.
If there is one thing that benefits Freeman from the offense, it is the fact that the passing game doesn't look good, no matter who is at quarterback right now. And then when you look at the wide receivers, you have, Courtland Sutton, who we talked about last week. We have Deshaun Hamilton. And I don't think you can count on Emmanuel Sanders doing anything this year, and there's nothing behind him that I know of. So if you can count on anything for Freeman, it's the fact that he'll get carries simply because they'll need to run the ball. Maybe they won't be able to afford to because the team won't be as good. But I do think there will be some rushing volume to be had in that offense.
Yeah, they definitely, could both get a decent amount of volume to be able to really show which one of them is going to be better with it, and still get plenty of carries throughout the season to really prove which one they need to be going with going forward. I don't think if Freeman can't show it this year that he necessarily gets a third year to show that stuff if Lindsey still does everything he did last year.
Alrighty, let's move on to our next one, and it is Alexander Mattison. He was the last pick of day 2, or maybe one of the last picks of day 2. 3rd round pick, goes to the Minnesota Vikings. Not much behind him in Minnesota. It's pretty much just Dalvin Cook and Alex Mattison. So, I'll just throw the obvious answer out here. The obvious answer is Alexander Mattison breaks out because Dalvin Cook gets hurt. But so I guess I'll leave the hard part to you. without a Dalvin Cook breakout, without a Dalvin Cook injury, how does Alexander Mattison break out?
I it's been kind of funny with Mattison that he kind of blew up on a couple, Twitter's always fun to try to find the sleepers. Nobody really wants to talk a whole lot about the guys that everybody knows are going to be great. They want to find the sleepers and everything. And I think at Madison's value, that 140 ADP has definitely been pushed up from so many people wanting to talk about him, and especially him, getting drafted to the Vikings and, with Cook's injury history. But I definitely, I don't know that it necessarily has to happen from an injury to Cook, but just with his injury history, there's the risk of Minnesota not wanting to, give him a ton of carries and load him up and, be that, workhorse back to potentially get injured again. And so that I could see Mattison developing a role there just from having enough, being able to take enough carries from that situation. I think it's probably kind of a cop out because it still has to do with Cook's injury history. But, I would still say that's probably where that's going to have to come from. Cook had enough draft capital and everything too that I think he's going to have a shot, and it's definitely going to be his to lose. I think without an injury, and Cook's been talented when he's on the field. That's really been his only downfall, is just his inability to stay on the field. So it take him staying, like, not being injured and being quite a bit worse for Mattison to really be able to develop much. And it'll definitely be tough if it's not from an injury, or, like I said, from just them trying to save Cook from another injury.
Mattison is a guy that I think I'm going to start sending some feeler offers out. It may just end up being a case of, the highest guy on him ended up drafting him in rookie drafts. But I do think that he is undervalued at this point. I think that it's interesting because I don't think that many teams draft a running back on day 2 in the 3rd round of the draft to be a backup. Like, I know that, NFL, Twitter talks about how running backs don't matter. If running backs don't matter, backup running backs certainly don't matter. So why is a team investing a second day draft pick, a 3rd round draft pick in a running back and a backup running back at that? We saw that with Darrell Henderson, and now we're seeing we saw with Mattison as well. And so Henderson is getting more of the, okay, this guy's more than just a backup. And I think that soon people will start to realize Mattison has a shot to be more than just a backup, take on that Latavius role with the upside of a possible RB1 with an injury.
Yeah, that definitely, he can definitely potentially be that. And, I would say that his draft capital, I think, is still potentially a result of Cook's injury history, mm-hmm. and them feeling like they need to take somebody that high so that they have somebody, because they know the risk of needing a backup. So I would say, just with who was in front of him, that that isn't necessarily the case, that they're planning on him being a backup. I would think that they're fully prepared for him needing to step into that role. And that's why they still drafted him, as early as they did. But, he definitely could still, if he can take what touches he will get just from, coming in to spell Cook and produce with them and be efficient, then he can definitely, that's what Latavius had done. He was pretty efficient. So with what touches he got early, and if he can do the same thing, he can definitely carve something out like that.
All right, let's move on to our last player, and it's going to be Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson, the quarterback for the Baltimore Ravens, currently going at 150 overall. Oh, by the way, I should have said this when we talked about Darnold. These are 1 QB ADP numbers. Obviously, Superflex 2 QB. Darnold would be going above 122. Jackson be going above 150. So let's talk about Lamar Jackson for a bit. and once again, I'll introduce the obvious part of the argument. Maybe I'll go a little bit deeper since I took the easy part away from you last time. I'll do it again. Lamar Jackson needs more passing volume. Pretty simple. Needs more passing volume. Needs less rushing volume so that he can stay healthy. But the key is that he's going to get that more passing volume because they invested highly. Marquise Brown in the first round, Miles Boykin in the third round. And so they're making sure that he doesn't have to always run all the time. But there still is the fantasy upside, the fantasy, floor as well of he's still going to get running work, even if they try and reduce it from, okay, this guy's going to get 14 carries a game to 9 carries a game. Those 9 carries are still incredibly valuable and could result in, 5, 6, 7 fantasy points added onto your passing day.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I liked specifically the people like, Boykin and
Marquise Brown.
Yeah, sorry, I thought I screwed up I pulled the cord. But yeah, I really like the wide receivers that they drafted with Marquise Brown and Boykin. I think both of them are, especially Boykin, I think can step in early and be somebody that's. I don't know that he's ever going to be not necessarily that wide receiver one, but I think he's got enough talent right now that he can step in and play a role. And then, Brown may need a little bit more development in my eyes, but he definitely is going to be somebody that is going to be a huge asset for Lamar Jackson. And I think a lot of it last year, I mean, they weren't really, it didn't seem like they were prepared to put Lamar Jackson in when they did. And they tried to, not throw the ball with him and let him run. And they just developed that offense for what they felt he was capable of at the time. And I feel like with a full offseason and, them knowing that exactly what they're going to be doing with him, that they're going to be able to build a little bit better offense for him and that he is going to be able to, like I said, he'll still have some of that rushing. It won't be as heavy as what he had last year. And then, have a greater passing game. I would think that he's got to be more efficient than he was last year too. But having a greater volume will definitely help that as well. And, be able to see him develop. I think he definitely has a chance, and he's, being undervalued a lot. I've seen him a lot later than 150 in several drafts. So I can see him outperforming that ADP even this year, and definitely with the development of those two rookie wide receivers, going forward, that if he can still keep the job, that he can be even better in future years.
All right, so we'll wrap up the show with this, and the question is, we talked about the wide receivers here. Who benefits most from a Lamar Jackson passing breakout? Do you think it's Mark Ingram, who did have success in the passing game with New Orleans, even with Kamara, sharing a backfield with him, or is it Justice Hill, the young back?
I would think that it'd be Justice Hill that is going to benefit the most. I think it seems to me that they're planning on, yes, Mark Ingram does have those abilities, but that's not what they're planning on using him for, that he's going to be that strictly the running back, or not strictly, but that they're not going to lean on him as much. I mean, it's just, he was able to be as good of a passer in New Orleans with Brees and with that offense, or a pass catcher with Brees in that offense. I don't know that with Lamar that he's going to be able to have quite that role. And I don't think they're planning on that for him. But I feel like Justice Hill would better benefit from that. So that's what I would lean toward, is Justice Hill. But Mark Ingram does have that ability, so they could end up using him that way.
Alrighty, that'll wrap up our show for today. Thanks for listening. Thanks for hopping on with us, Justin. We always appreciate it. And we will let you know that you should subscribe to RotoViz Radio, leave a rating and review. Say how you like Justin more than Dan, and we'll fire him. Take the money for ourselves. And we really appreciate all you guys listening, and we'll talk to you guys next week.
Kadoosh.
There we go.